Welcome and good evening to another fabulous episode of Epic Understanding. I have someone special here for you. You know what? He's going to talk to you about risk and diplomatic protocol along with resilience. It's going to be amazing. This is the kind of guy that helps you take small habits and make big changes. Welcome, Michael Tross. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fabulous. I am absolutely wonderful. I cannot wait for you to unfold these exciting ideas for us. Really, you've been in education a very long time, adult education, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And before we, unpack your rich history, can you tell us how did you get into adult education?
Here's this is a relevant story, so maybe this is why I'm talking about these things now. But for a long time, I had wanted to pursue my education, and a lot of things got in my way. And there were a lot of things I wanted to do in my life, and a lot of as they tend to do, a lot of things came up unexpectedly. A lot of changes came about. Many of them, really good changes, really positive changes. But it also meant that that the path that I originally thought about had to change, had to adjust. And
Okay.
so I sold shoes for a while. I worked in a factory for a while. I wound up moving and being involved in the theater as an actor and stage manager, which was great. But then that theater was on the brink of closing down. And so the question was, where do I go from here? So we made the decision. I made the decision. I need to go back. I need to complete my education. And that's got to, that's going to be the next thing, because where I was going, I couldn't hardly support the family, and things were very tough economically, and in terms of opportunity. And the biggest thing for me was making sure not only opportunity for me, but opportunity for my kids. That was extremely important to me. So we moved to St. Louis. I went and finished up my bachelor's degree at the age of 30 plus. And so when I completed my bachelor's degree, the question was, what do I do then? I went into event planning, and I was working. I had some pretty significant clients in the St. Louis area, Anheuser-Busch and Enterprise Rent-A-Car Corporate, and MasterCard, a few others. But years doing that, I realized for myself, I wasn't having the kind of impact the real impact that I wanted to have in people's lives. And I wasn't really doing something that I felt connected to and I felt was important. So I made a conscious choice that I was going to leave that area and go into education. My first job was as an evening instructor.
I just have to push pause. I have to push pause. So somehow you built a bridge from being in theater to event planning, and then jumped into education. That's amazing.
Yeah, actually, it's something, because my kids are also involved in theater. My daughter studied theater as I did. And we've talked about this often, that in fact, theater has a lot of really good essential traits, qualities, habits that it kind of pushes you into that really help you in the business world, in education, in a variety of other areas. I think that I was a decent instructor because I had that background in the theater, and I knew what would excite an audience. And so that's kind of how I approached my classroom. It was a very dramatic presentation most of the time. But yes, I still love the theater and still focus on that and spend a fair amount of time talking about that. And that pops up in a lot of different ways. I've worked with people on plays. I've worked with people on books. I've worked with people on radio shows and music. And so that part still, carries on. But the big thing was to make a conscious choice. Even though I knew I was going to start over again, I was going to start small. I was going to start from the ground and, kind of rebuild a career. That was important to me. And so getting into education was a big part of that. In fact, I applied for this same position 5 times before they even interviewed me. So.
Wow. So you actually have a lot of practice at what people are just like getting into these days. And it's the big pivot, right? Everybody's pivot.
Yes. Sometimes, when it's happening, it feels like you're pivoting more than you really want to. But, I recently have been talking to a friend of mine, and he's selling the home that he grew up in, where he took care of his mom and she passed away. And that was really traumatic for him. And it was hard to give up that house and that life. But it's also extremely important that we make those changes because in the end, and I think we've talked about this before, but in the end, it really comes down to adaptation. It isn't necessarily the strongest. It isn't always the smartest. It's the people who can adapt, and pivoting is a lot of that. I didn't call it that when I was doing it, but yeah.
Well, a lot of employers are very concerned about people's adaptability quotient.
Yes. And that's one of the things that when I talk to, because I work with students a lot on resumes and on interviewing skills, as you know. And one of the things that I really stress is transferable skills, because there are always things, no matter what you're doing. And the question I got most often is, well, what does working at Burger King have to do with becoming a medical assistant? And you'd be surprised a lot, because there's still concerns about safety, about cleanliness. There's concerns about customer service, about trust and ethics. And so there's a lot going on there that are transferable skills that no matter where you are, there are places that will look for and want those skills that you've developed.
Wow. So what do you think the top 3 things that people need to know about becoming pliable and, upping their adaptability ability? Adaptability ability. How do you get there?
There's a number of things. First of all, it's really important that you honor and recognize the input of other people, particularly people who may have more experience or a different life experience than you. On the other hand, it's also extremely important that you keep that, you moderate that with your own goals and what's in your heart. The first thing is, I think you have to be true to yourself. I think, and in that, people, I think, sometimes confuse that, well, if I change my way of doing things, am I really being myself? Yes, you are. The same as if you are with your parents, you're going to behave one way. If you're with your friends, you're going to behave a different way. That's still you. But I think it's really important that you adapt. I think communication adaptation is one of the biggest things that people can be cognizant of, can be aware of, and can utilize. It's really important to know when to apply which set of communication skills and which set of life skills that you've developed. I encourage people to develop a very broad band of skills and a big toolbox. At the same time, you have to know which tool to use and when to use it and how to use it. And so I think that's that's one of the first things that I would say.
So I think we're getting into one of your coined terms, which is diplomatic protocol. Unpack that for us.
Yes. If you went to work at the State Department,
Mhm.
you would find out very quickly that one of your major goals and one of your major responsibilities is to track uh, acceptable behavior, acceptable forms of communication, body language, not to mention spoken language. And how that pertains to each particular culture that you come into contact with. And so if you are welcoming a head of state from Russia, you would do that very differently. The protocols are very different than if you're greeting the head of state from Japan or the Queen of England. And so knowing what those protocols are and how to implement them correctly is extremely important. The same thing is true when you go to work. The protocols at McDonald's are very different than the protocols at your local hospital. They may share some things, but at the same time, there's going to be some things that are significantly different. Part of that is the language that's used. Part of that is the body language. And it's going to be even more, that difference is going to be even more pronounced when you go to your family reunion. So the things that are acceptable at your family reunion are not necessarily going to be acceptable in the workplace. And I think knowing that and recognizing this is not about not being true to yourself. This is not about being who you genuinely are. It is about being who you are in this particular environment. And I think that's extremely important for people to be aware of. So diplomatic immunity, that's a whole different issue. Diplomatic protocol really comes down to knowing what's appropriate in a particular environment and being comfortable with that so that you can be you.
I love it. I love it. So one of the things that I say is that people need to develop a professional self. But I think you've taken it beyond that, and you just need to develop a personality appropriate for the environment that you're in.
See, that's the thing. One of the things that you learn in theater is, if you're an actor, is the best actors draw from themselves. And
Wait,
so
the best
if they're
actors do what now?
the best actors draw from themselves, their emotions, their
Okay.
experiences,
Okay.
and that's how they motivate and fill the emotional life of a character. And so that it reads as genuine. When you watch a movie, if it's very obvious that the person is acting, that's not very good. You don't like that.
Mhm.
But when they're not acting, when you can't tell, it's typically because that actor is drawing from something very real within themselves. And
Mm.
the same thing is true in the workplace. When you draw from something that's really true for you, and channeling it through this particular aspect of yourself. And so, if you grew, depending on your culture, you might have heard, mom say, put your best foot forward. We have company, right? And so use your library voice, whatever. But all those things are just aspects of ourselves. It's how do we behave? What choices do we make within that particular set of circumstances?
So Kenneth is just saying authenticity is the key. That's what he's saying. And it seems like you're saying that as well, but you're really asking us to blossom within our authentic selves.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing. People think that to be authentic, you can only be one way. That's the only
Mhm.
authentic you. But let me ask you this. Is the you that's happening right now the same you that was happening in third grade?
That's a
Probably
good way
not.
to put it.
So that actually, again, I'm going to have a lot of theater references tonight, I've got a feeling, but that again actually came out of a play I was directing, and the idea that reincarnation happens, but it just happens in one lifetime. So that you're the same spirit you were when you were in third grade, but now
Mm-hmm.
here you are and you're a completely different person. And so the thing about it is that as we go from environment to environment, we can still be completely authentic, um, but we manifest that, we express that in different ways, and that's okay. It's, you wouldn't have the same demeanor at church as you would if you went out to, a club with some friends, and that's okay. Uh, as long as, and I agree, authenticity, being genuine. And again, that's really what separates great actors and actresses from mediocre ones, is the more authentic they can bring, the more of themselves they bring to that, the more genuine it feels, because it's coming from a genuine place within them.
So I know you work in the educational industry. What do you say to people that they're, because a lot of people are just like, education is crap. Going to school is crap these days. Honestly, they're saying, who needs the student loans? What do you say to
Yeah.
that?
And, well, I'm not going to talk about student loans,
Okay.
but except in this. Um, in the same way that there are two kinds of debt, there's good debt and bad debt. Good debt is actually investment debt. When you buy a home and that home appreciates in value, that's good debt because you're going to get that back. Education is
Mm-hmm.
good debt because you're investing in your future. Career paths today depend so much on education and educational background. Um, I will say that in my own education, I was very fortunate. I got a lot out of my education. I
Mm-hmm.
liked the educational environment. I had teachers who challenged me. But the biggest thing is this: in order to adapt, you have to learn new skills, and you have to come in contact with new ideas. You have to learn how to decipher, which ideas do you agree with, which ideas do you not agree with, which things can you benefit from, and which things maybe not so much. But you have to be careful there, because things that you never thought you would use 5-10 years down the road, suddenly you find, oh, wow, I'm now utilizing that information. So the thing for me is, it's the difference between that same good debt, bad debt, comes down to informed risk versus reckless risk. And so informed risk means that you are basing the risk that you're taking on some data, on some information, on some experience. And reckless risk is something you just do just for the heck of it. And so I encourage people to take informed risks, because that's how you learn how to adapt and grow. Small changes can make huge changes down the road, and that's what's really important to remember. I don't think it's so much that people think that education is not worthwhile, as maybe they feel like, oh, can I do that? Maybe I'm too old to do that. Maybe I'm not smart enough to do that. And that's where I really encourage people to go ahead and take that risk. That's so important, and that's what's going to help you meet those challenges that come up.
Mm. Savor the flavor of the awesomeness. I like that. I don't think you could go wrong with education myself. It's really one of the best things that I can do. At the same time, I'm a firm believer that you need to be a lifelong learner, period.
Yes.
And it's not just picking up a book, but you need to learn about the people that you're in. And, um, My mother recently came home from the hospital. I never dreamed that um, I would have to have those skills to take care of her. But because of the environments I was in, and because I was paying such close attention while she was in the hospital, how they were bathing her and things of that nature, I actually am pretty well equipped to take care of her. At the same time, I had to put together her hospital bed. I didn't know I was going to do that either.
Yeah.
But I,
Well, and that's the thing, because I think the last year and a half has really magnified that aspect of our lives. So, for instance, a couple of days ago, I got my first professional haircut in a long time.
oh wow.
And so my wife was cutting my hair, and she learned how to do that. And she was doing a really good job at it, but she learned how to do it just by watching the people who cut my hair.
Hmm.
And so I made it through, and I could have had really, really out of control hair, but I did not, thanks to her, paying attention and adapting. And again, small things, small changes, really create the opportunities.
That's amazing. So tell me, you've been in the education game for a long time. You've been the president of different kinds of schools and
Mhm.
things of that nature. What is a through line, no matter what someone's learning? What do people really need to know in order to succeed?
I think the biggest consistent factor is really comes down to a couple of things. One, the person has to decide what they want, and they have to
Hmm.
decide what they are willing to invest in that effort. Um,
Hmm.
that personal challenge, that personal commitment is really key. That's really crucial. Beyond that, they I think it's important to understand, if you're going to adapt, if you're going to, succeed and thrive and reinvent yourself and take advantage of new opportunities, you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to have to learn things. You're going to have to get information that maybe you're not always comfortable with.
Hmm.
And so I
Hmm.
think people coming into, you know, contact with new ideas, with new ways of doing things, with alternate ways of doing things, alternate ways of looking at things. I think that's extremely important, to keep an open mind and an open heart, and to assume the best rather than the worst. I tell people that a lot, but if we can just start assuming the best of each other,
Hmm.
look, if I'm challenging you to make a particular change, it's not because I just like that particular change. I think it was pretty recently I was working with a student, and at the school I was working at, we had a dress code, and she consistently came out of dress code, and she had a lot of things that were specifically not allowed within that dress code. And when we first began to talk, she was very, and again, I think it was part of her idea of, I'm going to be true to myself. You can't tell me who to be. And the truth of the matter was, I didn't want to tell her who to be. That's not my goal. My goal, though, was to say, when you leave this school and you enter the workforce, that first day is either going to be easier or harder. And a lot of that's going to have to do with the decisions that I make, and how I work with you, and my expectations and how we work together. I want that first day to be as easy as it can be. But there's a trade-off. I can either make things easy at school, or I can make things easy at work, but I can't do both. So the focus was on making things maybe a little more difficult up front, maybe a lot more adaptation up front, but when you got to the workplace, you knew what you were doing, you knew how to do it, you knew how to be successful. And then it comes down to when you get to the workplace, guess what? They do it differently too. And realizing that everything that you learned at school is, again, still not the only way things can be done and done appropriately. So there's going to be more adaptation. But hopefully what an education teaches you, above all, is how to endure and how to adapt.
I think those are two key ingredients to that magic word, resilience. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
so I'm going to ask you, there's a poll on LinkedIn that I put out, and it's heavily one way versus the other. But I'm curious, do you think, how would you vote in this poll? Can resilience be taught?
I'm not sure if resilience can be taught. I am sure that resilience can be learned. And in fact, I think that
Hmm.
I think that's almost always how you have to do it. Resilience comes as a survival mechanism under traumatic circumstances. In
Well, say
this,
that again. Hold on. Say that again.
uh,
Resilience
it's a
comes what?
as a survival instinct under traumatic circumstances.
Wow. That's, I just feel like that is, I've never heard that before. Resilience comes as a survival instinct under traumatic circumstances. That's worth writing. I'm going to quote
Maybe
you.
I've got a book. Absolutely, but really, isn't that it? I mean, when you think about resilient people,
Loved it
haven't they
too.
overcome? Haven't they
Thank
overcome
you, Aces.
traumatic circumstances?
Well, yes, but I guess I've never heard it put so succinctly and so well. So it was like, wow, I love that.
Yeah, I think,
That's why I hang around you.
yeah, that's um, it. I think it really comes down to, you know, you hear it a lot, and you hear it in movies, you hear it in books, teachers tell it to students, parents tell it to children, but who said life was easy?
Mm.
But, and this I think is really essential, life may not be easy, but we should strive to make it enjoyable.
Mhm.
And that part of it is up here and in here. We decide if we are enjoying our lives, and we decide what to do about it. And
Mhm.
so I think, that's a challenge. And look, you know, if I sound like, oh, hey, I've got it all figured out, I've just done that naturally all my life. No, that's really not true. Um, I have had my rough times. I still have rough times. I still have places where I'm not sure about things, where I'm taking risks and I'm not sure if they're good risks, if they're the risks I should be taking. There's a degree of uncertainty in life. Um,
Mhm.
but I think you have to embrace a certain amount of that, and that's part of that adaptability. You make a plan, you work your plan, but you also do that knowing that your plan is going to change. I know very few people who got from point A to point T, and nothing changed in their plan between those points. I think that's what it comes down to. Make a plan, that's important. Work your plan, that's important. Know that your plan is going to change and learn how to adapt with that, and that's extremely important.
Wow. That's very good advice. You sound like you've been saying that over and over again. Somehow, I think so.
Yes, as much to myself as to anyone else. But yeah, I say that a lot. When you work with students, look, um, a lot of times, and this actually comes more to training that I do with teachers and faculty and staff. Um, how many times do students come up and say, I have to quit because circumstances in their life seem overwhelming, and the easiest decision, not the best, and they even know that, but the easiest decision is, well, I'll give up school. That way I can do these other things that are extremely important at the moment. But 9 times out of 10, when you actually sit down and talk with that student, they don't really want to leave their education. They just feel like that's the choice that they have. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of it comes down to talking through and seeing if there aren't other options. And you know what? Almost always there are. And whether it's education or any other important area of your life, um, don't get bogged down into an either or, critical thinking error. There's almost always a third, a fourth, or a fifth option. And again, that really comes down into being willing to make those small changes now that can yield big changes in where you wind up.
So let's talk about quitting. Let's talk about that because I know that comes up. And for the record, I want to remind everyone that when we're saying students, we're talking about adult learners. These are typically people who have a child or two. They are working and going to school at the same time. And so it's a big deal. And they might be overwhelmed, is the type of student that you're dealing with, right?
Yeah, overwhelmed puts it mildly. Think about a single parent who has one, two kids at home, some of them sometimes in diapers, some of them sometimes sick and special need kids,
Mm.
and they're facing their lights being turned off or there's no food in the refrigerator. And I'm saying, come to school, make a way. That's a challenge. And before anyone gets the idea that I don't care about those things, I care implicitly about those things. Those things have to be addressed. You can't leave your kids behind. You can't just forget about the lights and whether or not there's food in the refrigerator. Those things have to be addressed. But in the long haul of it, I also know that by completing their education, by getting what they came there for, they stand a better chance of making sure that doesn't happen again. So if we can find a way over this hurdle, and we almost always can, if we can find a way over this hurdle and get you to the goal, your life and the lives of your children and your family will change exponentially. If we don't, and so let's talk about quitting, and particularly in an educational environment.
Mhm.
If you don't find that way and you quit, what happens now is the lights still are being faced turning off. You still have kids in diapers or special needs kids. But now you also have a debt that you don't have the career to pay for.
Mhm.
And so your life just got a little harder. And that's definitely not where I want to go. So sometimes, as difficult as it is, uh, reaching the goal, and again, that's why I say education is as much about endurance as it is about information, because it seems like whenever you enter the educational environment, everything in life starts getting thrown at you, and every obstacle comes your way to kind of keep you from getting there. But if you can endure, if you can find the resilience, uh, and those are traumatic circumstances, it really comes down to what kind of survival do you want, and what kind of survival is important for your kids. Um, that's when those changes really start maybe making sense, and we start thinking in a little bit longer terms than just what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but what's going to happen a year from now, what's going to happen 5 years from now. And by the way, you also have to think about this, especially if you have kids. If you quit, what do you say to your child when they come to you? And you now know, by the way, you know without a doubt that education is extremely important. And they say, I'm quitting. No, you're not. Well, you did. So, I mean, I think, honestly, going back to school as an adult learner myself, I really understand that. I know what that's like to, work and go to school and have kids. I did all that. My kids watch me go to school, but they all for it kind of mindset that draws dividends long after you've, quit going to school or quit working or quit doing anything else, because they will instill that in their children, and it carries on. So that's again one of those small changes that makes that makes big changes in the long run. But I think most importantly, I think people need to understand that it's never too late to make those small changes. And so I emailed, when we were talking about this, I emailed a number to you, 2.5 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
2.5 billion is the number of seconds that, if you live to be 80, roughly the number of seconds, is actually a bit more than that you have in your life. And I think everyone's been in a circumstance, you might not have realized it at the time, but where their life changed in a second or less. When you think about Olympic athletes and swimmers in particularly, the difference between a gold and silver, or between a bronze and fourth place, is often tenths of a second, hundredths of a second. So within a second, I use a second because it's, a pretty compact period of time. But when you have every second, you have that opportunity to make a small change. And you say, well, but I'm 40, it's kind of, if you're 40, you still have 1.25 billion seconds to make a change. That's a lot of seconds to make a change. That's a lot of opportunity. And so even if you're 60, you still have 3/4 of a billion. You have almost a billion seconds still. There's opportunity, and really it comes down to choice. It comes down to, what do you want? Being honest with yourself about that, and how much do you want it?
When you said 60, somehow my mind wandered to KFC. But it was only because I read somewhere that the Colonel actually didn't become, really didn't open up his first restaurant until he was in his 60s.
Yeah. Yes. And he was, in fact, a Kentucky Colonel. A title a title I share actually with him. Yes.
Explain
I am
that.
in Kentucky. The designation of Kentucky Colonel comes as a recognition of work done or services that you've provided to the community, or any number of a dozen things. Sometimes it's just because you're famous, and so there's a a healthy roster of Kentucky Colonels. But
Okay.
while I was working in Kentucky with one school system there, I did have that honor, and so subsequently I insisted that my daughter's dates refer to me as the Colonel. No, I'm kidding. They did not. We joked about that, but I did not, in fact, insist on that. But
Oh
no.
my God.
So there you go. Not something I had, thought about coming up tonight, but there you go.
Hey, you never know.
You
You
never
never know.
know.
It's
Adaptability.
epic understanding. We got
Yes.
to know the details.
Yes.
So there's been a few comments about your acting and your directing career. So there's some curiosity about that. Why don't you tell us? And because I think you're going to come back, why don't you tell us a little bit about one of the coolest people that you got to meet along the way?
Wow. There's a lot there to unpack.
I know you got to pick something. Just give them a
uh,
little bit. Give them a little
so
bit.
I did a acting workshop with Kevin Kline in
Yeah.
St. Louis. That was pretty nice. I had a very walk on kind of role in a movie with Robert Duvall and Randy Quaid and Tom Cruise. So I met all three of them. And so that was kind of interesting, being on the set in a way that you could actually watch them work. And so that was very interesting. But I think probably the most important thing is my relationship with a good friend of mine, Alan Bernhoft, who's a musician in LA. We have been writing and working on a play and some music together. And so hopefully we're still waiting on that to hit the stage, but hopefully that will be in the not too distant future. But so those are some pretty cool things.
You know, I'm looking forward to my ticket. And what city will it be? Is it going to be on Broadway? Where will I find this?
Yeah, It probably at first it would probably be near him, so probably in LA. So we'll see. Interestingly, I just had a friend of mine that I was in school with in my bachelor's, and which was a theater degree, and she is now stage managing the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child in San Francisco.
Oh,
And so she's doing very well for herself. But yeah, so I was like, that's pretty amazing. So pretty cool. Yeah.
that's so awesome. That is awesome. You know what? It is always fun hanging out with you. Um, I never fail to learn something when I'm hanging out with you. Is there any particular last words that you'd like to give the audience?
Um, the I think the thing is, again, it really does come down to making some being honest with yourself, first of all.
Mm,
Shakespeare said it best, to thine own self be true.
yeah.
But I think once you come to terms with yourself and once you come to terms with what's important to you, you can then start making the decisions that lead to the changes, that lead to the place you want to go. What I know is this: what you're focused on is the direction you're going to go. And so focus has a lot to do with it. The example that I use for students is, if you're driving a car and you're looking off to the right because maybe you're looking for a house or an address or whatever, guess what happens to the car? If you
Mm,
don't pay attention, if you don't refocus on the road, at some point that car is going to hit the side, because where you're focused is where you go. And so I think that's not original to me. I didn't come up with that idea, but it's something that I've learned to be true. So be careful where you're focused,
Mm.
because if you're focused on what you don't like, what you don't want, your mind does not understand not and don't. It doesn't understand negatives. If you say to your kid, "Don't fall off your bike," guess what's likely to happen?
They're
They're going
gonna
to fall
fall.
off the bike, because the mind doesn't hear don't. It doesn't hear negatives. It just hears fall off the bike. That's what it does. And so, but if you are focused on um, what you do want, what is important,
Mhm.
what you enjoy, what you love, what's important to you, you head towards those things. And I mean, that's a lesson. Again, I don't want to give anybody the idea, oh, I just do that naturally all the time and that just comes so easily. No, it's a process, and you keep having to learn that, and that's okay. Don't get discouraged, because that's what you have, one life, and so you decide where it goes.
That's amazing. You know what, Mike? As always, it's been real and it's been fun. As a matter of fact, it's been real fun.
Yeah, I've had a great time. I appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
It's 100% my pleasure. Everyone, thank you for watching another episode of Epic Understanding. I'll bring back Mike for you, I promise. And maybe he'll share more about his theater background and all of those good kinds of things. And we'll
Yeah,
see you next time.
sounds
Bye bye
great.
for now.
Bye.